My name is Naomi. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 9 years I've worked as a registered nurse. The last 4 of those as a charge nurse in an ICU unit at a mid-sized hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. I tell you that not to impress you, but because it matters to understanding who I am and how I think. When you spend your days in a room where everything is measured, heart rate, oxygen levels, medication doses, you develop a particular relationship with precision. You learn to observe without reacting. You learn that panic is expensive. You learn that the most dangerous thing in a crisis is not the crisis itself. It's losing your clarity. I met Ryan when I was 29. He was 31. We were introduced through mutual friends at a birthday dinner in uptown Charlotte, and he had this easy, unhurried confidence that I found immediately attractive. He was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. Organized, reliable, good with numbers. We dated for 18 months, got engaged, and married in a small outdoor ceremony in October 2021. 42 people. String lights. My brother Marcus gave a toast that made everyone cry, including Ryan. Marcus. I need you to understand who Marcus was before I continue, because this entire story runs through him. Marcus was my older brother by 4 years. He was a high school biology teacher who coached track on the side, made the best jerk chicken of anyone I've ever met, and had this laugh, this enormous, room-filling laugh that you could hear from 2 floors away. He was my person. When our parents divorced when I was 16, Marcus was the one who drove 40 minutes to pick me up on weekends. When I was struggling through nursing school, he was the one who stayed on the phone with me at 2 a.m. when I wanted to quit. He died 14 months before the night Ryan ended our marriage. Cardiac event. 38 years old. No warning. He was fine on a Tuesday and gone by Thursday. I still haven't fully accepted it, if I'm being honest. Marcus had been married for 6 years to Celeste. She was 35, a graphic designer, warm and funny and easy to be around. When Marcus died, I did what family does. I helped Celeste with the funeral arrangements. I helped her sort through paperwork. I invited her to Thanksgiving. I defended her to relatives who said she was moving on too fast when she started leaving the house again after 2 months. I chose Celeste. Actively. Repeatedly. Out of love for my brother. You understand now why what I'm about to tell you cuts where it cuts. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes from trust. It's not stupidity. I want to be clear about that. The people who get blindsided by betrayal are not, as a rule, naive or foolish. They're loyal. And loyalty, when it's real, makes you slow to assign bad motives to people you love. You don't scan for deception in the people you've chosen. You just believe. So I'm going to walk you through what I saw and what I told myself it meant, and you can judge for yourself. It started small, the way these things always do. About 8 months before Ryan ended our marriage, so roughly 6 months after Marcus's death, I noticed that Ryan had started volunteering to handle things for Celeste. Small things at first. He offered to help her figure out a lease issue with her landlord. He fixed a leaking faucet at her apartment one Saturday morning when I was working a double. He said, "She's family, Naomi. Marcus would have wanted us to look out for her." And I agreed, because that was true. And because I trusted him. Then there were the texts. I didn't go through his phone. I want to be clear about that. I'm not that person. But I'm also not blind. When you're sitting next to someone on the couch and their screen lights up at 10:47 on a Wednesday night and they angle it away from you before picking it up, you notice. I noticed 3 times in 1 month. When I asked who it was, Ryan said, "Celeste, she's just stressed about the lease renewal." And I believed him, because there was no reason not to. The dinner was harder to explain away. In February, about 5 months before he left, Ryan told me he had a work dinner on a Thursday. I believed him. He came home at 11 p.m., and I was awake because I'd taken the late shift and traded off with a colleague. He smelled like a restaurant I recognized, Luisa's, an Italian place about 12 minutes from our apartment, and I knew it was a restaurant he considered too expensive for a casual work dinner. He'd complained about the prices once when I'd suggested it. Said the pasta was $28 and it wasn't worth it. I didn't ask. I should have. Instead, I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind and went to sleep. What I didn't know then, and wouldn't know until much later, was that Celeste had posted a photo on her Instagram that same night. Just a glass of wine, dark table, string of soft lighting. No caption. No tag. Nothing incriminating. I only saw it weeks later when I was idly scrolling, and I thought to myself, that looks like Luis's. And then I thought, but that doesn't mean anything. That is what trust looks like from the inside. It looks like a reason. It looks like, but that doesn't mean anything. There were 3 missed calls from Celeste on Ryan's phone the morning he told me he didn't love me anymore. I saw them when his phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the bathroom after our conversation ended. 3 calls. Back to back. 7:14 a.m., 7:16 a.m., 7:19 a.m. I didn't pick up. I didn't throw the phone. I just stood there, and I let the knowledge settle into me the way cold water does, slowly, completely, all the way through. I still didn't know it was her. Not officially. Not yet. But something inside me, that part of me that monitors vital signs for a living, that notices the moment a patient's numbers start to shift before any alarm goes off, that part of me already knew. And it was furious. Ryan moved out on a Friday. He took his clothes, his record collection, his cast iron skillet, and a framed photo of the 2 of us from our honeymoon in Montego Bay. He left behind the chip-handled mug, the good knife set, and 3 years of unanswered questions. The whole process took about 4 hours. He was efficient about it in a way that told me he had been planning the logistics for longer than I wanted to calculate. I worked a Saturday shift the next morning because staying in that apartment alone felt like something I wasn't ready to survive yet. 12 hours in the ICU. 3 critical patients. A code at 2 p.m. that we pulled back from the edge. When you're in that room, there is no room for anything else. That's why I went. I needed to be somewhere that required all of me, so none of me had to sit with what had happened. I came home Sunday evening to a voicemail from Patricia, Ryan's mother. Patricia is a 61-year-old retired school administrator from Greensboro, and she had always been kind to me. Genuinely kind, not performed kind. She called to say she was sorry about the separation, that she loved me, that she hoped we could remain in each other's lives. Her voice was careful, measured. She'd clearly rehearsed it. And then, near the end of the message, her composure slipped, just slightly, and she said, "I just want you to know, Naomi, that I had no idea about him and Celeste. I didn't know it had gone that far. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." She caught herself immediately. You could hear it, the sharp inhale, the brief silence, the pivot to, "Anyway, call me when you're ready, no rush." She hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that. I want to describe what that moment felt like, but the honest answer is that it didn't feel like anything at first. It was like the message hadn't fully loaded yet. My brain registered the name, Celeste, processed the words, him and Celeste, filed them in the correct folder, and then just went quiet. The grief came later. Around midnight, I was washing a single dinner plate, and it hit me all at once. Not the betrayal by Ryan, which I had already begun to process, but the specific, surgical betrayal of Celeste. The woman I had held in a funeral home parking lot while she shook. The woman I had brought soup to on a Tuesday in November because she said she didn't have the energy to cook. The woman I had told, more than once, "Marcus would be so proud of how strong you're being." That woman. I cried for 40 minutes, washed my face, drank a glass of water, and then I made a decision, quietly and without drama, that I was not going to let this story end where they had written it to end. 11 days after Ryan moved out, he brought Celeste to his cousin Derek's birthday gathering, a casual backyard cookout in Concord. I was already there when they arrived. Derek had invited me separately, hadn't mentioned Ryan was coming, and I genuinely believe he didn't know about the situation yet. They walked in together. Ryan saw me first. His face did something complicated that I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to analyze. Celeste saw me a second later, and I will never forget this, she reached for Ryan's hand. She reached for his hand while looking directly at me. The entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Derek's wife, Tamara, visibly winced. Someone turned down the music. And Ryan, the man who had sat across from me at our kitchen table 11 days earlier and said, "I don't love you anymore," said out loud, in front of 7 people who knew us both.
Naomi. Hey.
I didn't know you'd be here. That was it.
That was all he said.
I looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. I looked at Celeste for 1. Then I turned to Derek, smiled, and said, "Happy birthday. Your ribs smell incredible." I stayed for 90 minutes. I was warm, present, and completely unreachable. When I left, I hugged Derek, waved to the group, and walked to my car without looking back. I drove 4 blocks, pulled over, and sat with my hands on the steering wheel for a long time. Then I thought about Marcus, about the boxes. And something clicked. 3 months after Marcus died, Celeste had asked me to help her go through some of his things. She was overwhelmed, understandably, and I had offered early on to help whenever she was ready. In late January of that year, we spent a Saturday at her apartment sorting through boxes. Books, clothes, paperwork, the miscellaneous accumulation of a life.
It was a hard day.
We cried twice and laughed once at a photo of Marcus in a truly terrible Halloween costume from 2009. At the end of that day, Celeste asked me to take a few boxes of documents home for temporary storage. She said her apartment was small, she wasn't ready to deal with the financial paperwork yet, and she trusted me. Her words, "I trust you with this, Naomi." I had put those boxes in my storage unit, a climate-controlled 10 by 10 space I rent for $87 a month off Albemarle Road, and, in the fog of grief and the busyness of life, largely forgotten about them. After the cookout, something made me think about those boxes. I drove to the storage unit the following Tuesday, on my day off. I pulled out the boxes, 3 of them medium-sized, sealed with brown packing tape. I brought them home, made coffee, and began to go through them carefully. Most of it was what I expected. Old tax returns, Marcus's college transcripts, a warranty document for a refrigerator he'd owned in 2014, an expired passport, cards he'd saved from birthdays and Christmases going back 15 years. I had to stop and breathe for a moment when I found one I had written him in 2008. Then, in the 3rd box, underneath a folder of utility bills, I found a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 documents that I had to read twice before I fully understood what I was looking at. The first was a life insurance policy, a term life policy Marcus had taken out in 2018, 18 months before he married Celeste. The primary beneficiary was listed as Celeste. That was expected. But the contingent beneficiary, the person who would receive the benefit if Celeste was deceased or unable to claim, was listed as me. Naomi Adiz Whitfield. My full legal name. My date of birth. The policy face value was $175,000. I set that document down carefully and picked up the second one. It was a record of a joint savings account that Marcus had opened with me, not Celeste, with me, back in 2016, years before his marriage. It was an account we had started together in our late 20s, both contributing small amounts, with the original intention of pooling money to eventually help our mother with housing costs. Life got complicated. The contributions had slowed. I had honestly forgotten it existed. The account had not been closed. It had not been transferred. According to the statement in that envelope, printed in March of the year Marcus died, it held $34,200. The third document was a handwritten note in Marcus's handwriting. Undated. It said, "Nay, if anything ever happens and you find this, the Albemarle stuff is yours to handle. You always knew what to do. M." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The coffee went cold. Then I picked up my phone and called an attorney. Not Ryan's attorney. Not a family friend. A probate and estates lawyer I found through a colleague at the hospital, a woman named Dana Osei, who had gone to law school at UNC and had 12 years of experience in exactly this kind of matter. I told her I needed a consultation. She had an opening that Thursday. I walked into that office with a manila envelope, the 3 documents, and the calm, focused energy of someone who has just realized that the story is not over. It had, in fact, just begun. What they didn't know was that I had stopped grieving and started documenting. There is a discipline to silence that most people underestimate. In the ICU, we call it clinical detachment, the ability to be fully present in a situation without being consumed by it. You feel everything and you act on none of it until the moment requires action. That skill, which I had spent 9 years developing in a professional context, became the most important tool I had for the 30 days that followed. Let me walk you through what I did and when. Day 3 after finding the documents, Dana Osei confirmed that the joint savings account, $34,200, was legally accessible to me as the surviving joint account holder. Marcus's death had not automatically transferred the account anywhere. It had simply sat dormant. Dana filed the required documentation with the bank that same week. Quietly. No announcement. No confrontation. Day 7. Dana reviewed the life insurance policy. The contingent beneficiary clause was valid and enforceable. However, because Celeste was still living and had filed a claim on the policy after Marcus's death, the $175,000 had already been paid out to her 14 months prior. That door was closed financially. But Dana flagged something else. In reviewing the estate paperwork, she found that Marcus had owned a small piece of land, a 0.4-acre lot in Cabarrus County that he had purchased in 2017 for $18,500, with the intention of eventually building a small rental property. He had never added Celeste to the deed. He died without a formal will. Without a will, North Carolina intestate succession law applied. Marcus and Celeste had no children. His estate, under those laws, would pass to his surviving spouse, which was Celeste. But Dana discovered that Celeste had never filed the proper paperwork to formally transfer the land into her name after Marcus's death. 14 months had passed. The land was technically still sitting in Marcus's name in Cabarrus County's Register of Deeds. Dana explained that while Celeste was still the likely legal heir, the absence of a completed transfer meant we had grounds to request a formal probate process, which would require Celeste to hire an attorney, file documentation, and legally account for all of Marcus's assets, including the joint account she may not have known existed. I said, "File it." Day 11. The joint account transfer was completed. $34,200 moved into an account in my name alone. I said nothing to anyone. Day 14. Probate proceedings were formally opened on Marcus's estate by Dana's office. Celeste was served notice at her apartment. I was at work when it happened. Dana texted me at 3:17 p.m. She's been served. I finished my shift. I drove home. I made dinner. I did not post anything on social media. I did not text Ryan. I did not call Celeste. I just lived quietly inside the knowledge of what was coming. Day 18. Ryan called me for the first time since moving out. Not to talk about the legal proceedings, he didn't know about those yet. He called to ask if I could forward him a piece of mail that had come to our old address. I was polite, brief, and gave nothing away. The call lasted 4 minutes. When I hung up, I remember thinking, he sounds distracted. I found out why on day 22. A mutual friend, Keisha, who knew both me and Celeste from the orbit of Marcus's life, texted me that morning. She said she didn't want me to hear it from someone else. She said Celeste had ended things with Ryan. Abruptly. She said, from what she'd heard, Celeste had told Ryan she wasn't ready for a relationship, that she was still grieving, that she needed space. I read that text 3 times. Then I thought about the probate notice, about the attorneys, about the fact that Celeste had just been formally contacted by an estate lawyer, which meant she was now suddenly, urgently aware that the financial questions around Marcus's estate were not as settled as she had assumed. She had received $175,000 in life insurance without issue. She had been living in what she believed was total financial clarity. And now, without warning, a legal proceeding had opened up that required her attention, her documentation, and her legal fees. A relationship that had been built on the ruins of someone else's marriage suddenly became complicated to maintain when that relationship started costing something. I am not saying those things were directly connected. I'm just noting the timeline. Day 27. Dana filed the completed documentation to transfer the Cabarrus County land into probate inventory. The process would take additional months to resolve fully, but the wheels were formally in motion. Celeste would need to retain counsel. The estimated legal costs on her end, Dana told me, would run between $3,500 and $7,000 depending on how long the process took. I want to be clear about something. I was not doing any of this out of cruelty. Every single action I took was legal, documented, and within my rights as Marcus's sister and as the surviving party on a joint financial account he and I had opened together. I was not manufacturing a problem. I was simply refusing to let one be buried. Marcus deserved to have his affairs handled properly. I was the one who had always handled things properly. That had not changed. Day 29, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail.
It was Celeste.
Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it, unmistakably frightened. She said she had received paperwork from an attorney and that she thought there must be some misunderstanding and that she really hoped we could talk, that she had always cared about me, that Marcus would have wanted us to handle things like family. Like family. I listened to that voicemail 4 times. Then I forwarded it to Dana and texted, "Do not respond on my behalf. Let the process continue." Day 30. Ryan called. Ryan called at 8:43 on a Sunday morning. I know the exact time because I had just gotten home from a night shift, 7 hours in the ICU, 2 critical patients, 1 family I had to sit with at 4 a.m. while they made a decision no family should ever have to make. I was still in my scrubs. I was standing in my kitchen, waiting for the coffee to finish, when my phone lit up on the counter. His name. On my screen. After 30 days of near silence. I stood there and watched it ring.
Once. Twice.
3 times. And I made a conscious decision, not impulsive, not emotional, conscious, to answer it. Not because I wanted him back. Not because I had anything left to say. But because I had earned the right to hear exactly what a man sounds like when the story he chose over you falls apart in his hands. I picked up. Naomi. His voice was different. I noticed it immediately, that clinical part of me that catalogs changes in tone and breathing the way other people catalog song lyrics. He sounded hollowed out, like something had been removed from the center of him, and he hadn't figured out how to stand up straight without it. "Hey, Ryan." A long pause. Then, she ended it. "Celeste. It's over. I needed to hear your voice."
I'm sorry.
"I know I don't have the right to call you. I just didn't know who else." "Ryan. I made a mistake, Naomi.
I know that now.
I know I threw away something real, and I don't expect you to." "Ryan." Quieter this time. Firm. He stopped. I looked out my kitchen window. Early morning light. A neighbor walking a small brown dog on the sidewalk below. The coffee maker clicking off. Ordinary Sunday morning things continuing to exist, indifferent to this conversation. I said, "I hope you're okay. I mean that. I genuinely hope you're okay." Silence. "But I'm not the person you call when you're not. I haven't been that person for 30 days. And before that, honestly, I'm not sure how long it had been." He started to say something. I kept going, not unkindly. "You need to call a friend. Or a therapist. Someone who can actually help you right now. I hope you do that." "Naomi, if there's any chance." "There isn't." Not angry. Not cold. Just true. I said goodbye. I hung up. I poured my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table in my scrubs, and I waited for the wave of emotion that I expected to follow. The grief, the second-guessing, the familiar pull of wanting to fix something that was broken. It didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't felt in so long that it took me a moment to identify it. Quiet. Not emptiness. Not numbness. Actual quiet, the kind that happens when something that was vibrating painfully for a very long time finally goes still. I sat with that for a while. Did I end the months that followed? The legal process continued on its own timeline, the way legal processes do. The Cabarrus County land was formally entered into probate. Celeste retained an attorney. I was told the retainer was $4,000. The proceedings moved slowly and without drama. Dana handled everything professionally. There were no explosive confrontations, no screaming matches, no social media wars. Just paperwork. Just process. Just the quiet, unglamorous machinery of things being done correctly. The joint account, Marcus's and mine, had already been transferred. $34,200, legally mine, sitting in an account bearing only my name. I used $18,000 of it as part of a down payment on a 2-bedroom condo in Noda, The Arts District in Charlotte, 6 minutes from the hospital, on the third floor with a window that faces east and fills the living room with light every single morning. I painted the walls a warm terracotta that Ryan would have hated, and I love unreservedly. I used another portion to cover 3 months of therapy with a counselor who specializes in grief and relational trauma. I went every Thursday at 6 p.m. I did not skip a single session. That was, without question, the best investment I made that year. I kept a small amount in savings. I kept the chip-handled mug. Ryan, from what I understand through people we both know, is doing the slow, necessary work of rebuilding a life that he dismantled himself. I don't follow his trajectory closely. It doesn't serve me to. But I do know that the version of the story he likely tells, where he was simply a man who fell for someone unexpectedly, where the timing was just wrong, where nobody was really at fault, that version requires forgetting a lot of specifics. The texts at 10:47 p.m. The dinner at Luis's. The 3 back-to-back calls at 7 a.m. on the morning he told me our marriage was over. I remember all the specifics. I always will, but I don't carry them the way I used to. Celeste and I have not spoken since her voicemail on day 29. Her attorney and Dana have communicated on her behalf throughout the probate process. I think about Marcus sometimes when I think about her, about the fact that he loved her, that she was at some point someone worth loving. I think about how grief can hollow people out in ways that make them reach for things they shouldn't. I don't know if that's an explanation or just an observation. Probably both. What I know is this. I did not destroy anyone. I did not manipulate anyone. I did not call anyone's employer or post anything online or show up anywhere uninvited. I simply refused to be erased quietly. I simply chose to handle what was legally and rightfully mine to handle. I simply decided that my brother's memory and my own dignity were worth the paperwork. And in doing so, I discovered something I hadn't expected. I discovered that I was still here. Not the version of me that had quietly reorganized herself around Ryan's preferences for 3 years. Not the version that deferred, accommodated, made herself smaller in ways she didn't even notice until the space was gone. The version that existed before all of that. The one who drives 40 minutes when someone needs her. The one who stays calm at 4 a.m. when everything is falling apart. The one who knows what to do. She had not gone anywhere. She had just been waiting for me to remember her. If you've listened this far, I think you already know what this story is really about. It's not about Ryan. It's not even about Celeste. It's about what happens when you spend years loving people loudly, completely, and without condition, and then one day you turn that same energy toward yourself. Just once. Quietly. Without asking for permission. I've had people ask me if I regret answering that call on day 30. If there was a part of me that wanted to take him back, to return to something familiar, even broken. The honest answer is, for about 4 seconds, yes. The heart is not logical. It remembers warmth even after the source of that warmth has burned you. That's not weakness. That's just being human. But then the quiet came. And the quiet was louder than any apology he could have offered. If you are somewhere in this story right now, if you recognize the back-to-back calls, or the dinners you weren't invited to, or the slow erosion of a space that used to feel like yours, I want you to know that the document in the third box is real. Maybe it isn't a life insurance policy or a land deed. Maybe it's a boundary you haven't enforced. A conversation you've been putting off. A door you've been too afraid to close. The leverage is real. The quiet is available. And you are more resourceful than the people who underestimated you have any idea. If this story resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever chosen yourself, even once, even imperfectly, even just by hanging up the phone and pouring a cup of coffee, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. If the story moved you at all, the most meaningful thing you can do is share it with one person who needs to hear it right now. You probably already know who that person is. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is where real stories live. First person. No filters. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because the next story is already written, and it starts in a place you won't expect. And if you want to go deeper, the last video is right there. I'll see you in it.